Today, we will be covering Chapter 7, Protein. So on this page, we see the protein content of foods. And if we're looking over here, you see tuna, 3 ounces. It actually has a good bit of protein. It's like 70% of the energy is coming from protein. Then you'll see broiled chicken breasts, beef chuck roast, yogurt's pretty high, and these numbers pretty much go down except for eggs as this chart goes along over here. But if we're looking at my plate, the purple portion is protein. And you know that we want 1/4 of our plate to be protein. Because proteins are organic molecules, they contain the elements carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, just like carbohydrates and lipids. However, there's a major difference between protein from the other energy-producing nutrients. It contains nitrogen. Some proteins also contain the mineral sulfur, but that nitrogen is really what differentiates it. Together, these elements form amino acids, which is the building blocks for protein synthesis. So the smallest element of protein is amino acids. Amino acids are needed to make body proteins, and we get them from protein-containing foods, and also through cell synthesis. Each amino acid contains a central carbon, a nitrogen or amino group, an acid or a carboxyl group, hydrogen, and a side chain. The side chain is what makes each amino acid unique, and it also will determine the structure, function, and the name of that amino acid. So if we look at this picture, you can see the carbon skeleton right here. This is the carbon skeleton, this entire green little block right here. And this is just a generic amino acid. You can see the carboxyl group right here in this blue box. And then you have the amino group, this NH2, that makes up your amino group. So here you have a generic amino acid. And within this carbon skeleton, you have this R. And this R represents that side chain. So this is what makes each different amino acid. So if we look at glycine, you see your amino group here. You see your carboxyl group here. And within our carbon skeleton, you see a hydrogen as your side chain. That makes up glycine. That's going to be the amino acid glycine. If we look at L-alanine, once again, we have our carbon skeleton right here in this green block. We have our amino group right here, that NH2. And we have our carboxyl group. What makes it different is this right here, your methyl group. So even though they are chemically similar, this right here, the hydrogen and the methyl group, is what changes the function and the structure of these amino acids. And amino acids, they can have chemically similar side chains, and once they do, they're classified into different classes like branched chain amino acids. The body needs 20 different amino acids to function, and all of them are needed for life, but 11 of them do not have to come from the diet. This means that they are non-essential. Your body can make these amino acids from other amino acids that are consumed. On the other hand, there are non-essential amino acids that have to be obtained from food. These cannot be made in the body because the carbon skeleton cannot be made, the amino group cannot attach to the carbon skeleton, or the whole process cannot be done fast enough for the body's needs. Some non-essential amino acids can become conditionally essential during infancy, disease, and trauma. An example of this is seen in someone with PKU. They have a limited ability to metabolize phenylalanine and convert it to tyrosine. This makes the amino acid tyrosine become conditionally essential, because the amino acid phenylalanine is typically an essential amino acid. But because the person cannot consume it, now tyrosine has to be consumed in the diet. Non-essential amino acids can be synthesized through transamination, which is the transferring of an amino group from one amino acid to the carbon skeleton to form a new amino acid. If the amino group is lost and not transferred to another carbon skeleton, this process is called deamination. The lost amino group is incorporated into urea in the liver. It is then transported via the bloodstream to the kidneys and is finally excreted in the urine. Animal proteins, except for gelatin, contains all 9 essential amino acids. So that makes them a complete or a high quality protein. They contain all of the essential amino acids needed in the body. Plant proteins, except for quinoa and soy, do not contain all 9 essential amino acids, and they are low in at least 1 amino acid. So we call those incomplete or low quality proteins. Cells require a pool of essential amino acids for the synthesis of body proteins. Essential amino acids that are in the smallest supply are called the limiting amino acid because they limit the amount of protein that the body can make. You can combine 2 or more plant proteins to form a complementary protein. We know that plant proteins are incomplete, so by joining them, you can form a complete protein. So if we look at this chart, it's showing you the limiting amino acids in plant sources of protein. In this first column, we have the food, so we have legumes such as peanuts, dry beans, navy, black, and kidney beans. So the primary limiting amino acid is methionine, and we can create a complete protein by combining it with grains, nuts, or seeds. So in this fourth column, you see complementary food protein combinations. So you can combine hummus and pita bread, form a bean burrito, white beans and rice. And because we live in South Louisiana, this is one of the biggest recommendations you'll see is beans and rice to form a complementary protein. So you have all 9 essential amino acids. So if we come here, we have nuts and seeds, such as cashews, walnuts, almonds, and sunflower seeds. The limiting amino acid is lysine, which is also the limiting amino acid in the grains, such as wheat, rice, oats, and corn. And so by combining it with legumes, we form a complete protein. So like I said, one of the biggest things you'll see is combining beans and rice, specifically for us in the South. But you can also combine like lentil soup and cornbread, barley and black beans. Amino acids are linked together by peptide bonds to form proteins. These peptide bonds form between the amino group of one amino acid and the carboxyl group of another. So we can form dipeptides, which is 2 amino acids, tripeptides, which is 3 amino acids, oligopeptides, which is 4 to 9, and polypeptides, which is 10 or more. And this, abbreviations for di, tri, poly, this is for carbs, lipids, protein, its chemical structure. So di means 2, tri means 3, and then poly means more than 10. So synthesis of protein is determined through gene expression. This gene expression begins with when DNA replicates, and it's making an exact copy of the gene. So each gene serves as a template to guide that duplication of genetic information which is in the DNA. Protein synthesis takes place in the ribosomes, which is located in the cytosol of the cell. Because the DNA is in the cell nucleus, the DNA code used for the synthesis of a specific protein must be transferred from the nucleus to the cytosol. This is completed through messenger RNA, also abbreviated mRNA. So the mRNA travels to the ribosomes, and then those ribosomes read the codons on the mRNA, and then they're translated into instructions to produce a specific protein. We can break down the organization of protein into 4 structures. The primary structure, which is the sequential order of amino acids, and this determines the protein's shape. So if you're looking at this picture, it's alanine, glycine, serine, valine, leucine, lysine, glycine, valine. This is the primary structure of it. The secondary structure is a spiral-like pleated sheet shape. So it's twisting like this into this shape. and this is from weak chemical bonds between each amino acid. The tertiary structure is the three-dimensional folding, which determines the overall shape and function. And quaternary structure, which is when two or more separate polypeptides interact with each other. Proteins go through denaturation when exposed to heat, acid, or alkaline solutions, enzymes, or when they have been agitated. It changes the protein's three-dimensional structure. You can think of this when eggs are being cooked. They go from a clear liquid mixture to white and yellow colors and become firm. Another way that protein is denatured is for women whenever they straighten or curl their hair. You are changing the structure of the protein. Proteins in the body are constantly being broken down, being rebuilt, and repaired. This is called protein turnover, and it allows cells to adapt to changing circumstances by increasing production of needed proteins and also reducing the production of proteins that are not currently needed. So if we're looking at sources of protein, the typical North American diet consists of 70% of proteins coming from meat, poultry, fish, milk, cheese, legumes, and nuts. But if we're looking at the typical worldwide diet, only 35% of protein comes from animal sources, and plants are the major source of protein. Some benefits of consuming plant sources of protein are the increased amount of fiber, vitamins, minerals, and phytochemicals. Some other benefits of plant proteins are that they do not contain cholesterol. There's very little saturated fat, which we know we want to consume 10% or less of that. And it also helps reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease, certain cancers, obesity, and diabetes. There are different ways that scientists evaluate the protein quality of food. These measures indicate a food protein's ability to support growth and maintenance. Protein quality is determined by the food's digestibility, which is the amount of amino acids absorbed in the amino acid composition compared to a reference protein, such as egg white protein. The biological value of a protein is a measure of how efficiently the absorbed food protein is converted into body tissue protein. If there is enough of all 9 essential amino acids in a certain food, that person can efficiently incorporate amino acids into body proteins. This is determined by comparing the nitrogen retention in the body with that found in the food. Egg white protein has the highest biological value of any food at 100. But in general, most animal proteins have a high biological value, while most plant proteins have a lower biological value. The protein efficient ratio, also known as PER, compares the amount of weight gain of laboratory animals consuming protein being studied against the weight gain of laboratory animals consuming a reference protein, such as milk protein. The PER of a food will reflect the food's biological value. Animal proteins with a high biological value will also have a high PER, and plant proteins with a low biological value will have a low PER. The FDA uses the protein efficient ratio to set standards for labeling of food that is intended for infants. The protein digestibility corrected amino acid score, also known as PDCAAS, is the most widely used method to measure protein quality. This score is calculated by multiplying a food's chemical score by its digestibility. The chemical score is the amount of each essential amino acid in a gram of the food protein being tested, which is divided by the ideal amount for that amino acid in a gram of a reference protein, which is typically egg white protein. If a protein is missing one of the 9 essential amino acids, the PDCAAS is 0. Nitrogen balance is a method to determine protein needs. If someone is healthy and not in a period of growth or recovery, they need to consume protein in the amount that replaces the protein that's lost in urine, feces, sweat, skin cells, hair, and nails. If protein intake equals the amount lost, then protein balance or equilibrium is maintained. Negative protein or nitrogen balance is when protein intake is less than losses. This can develop when eating inadequate amounts of protein, in addition to a serious untreated illness or injury, or diseases such as AIDS that increase protein breakdown. Positive protein balance is when protein intake is greater than losses. This occurs during periods of growth and recovery from trauma, injury, and illness. Eating more protein does not build additional body protein. The RDA for protein is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. When using this amount, a person's healthy body weight should be used. The acceptable macronutrient distribution range for protein is between 10 and 35%. So remember, the AMDR is based off of calories. So if you're consuming a 2,000 calorie diet, between 10 and 35% of those calories should come from protein. The RDA for protein does not address any additional protein amounts that is needed during recovery from illness or injury, or for highly trained athletes. For those individuals, protein needs can range from 0.8 grams per kilogram to 2 grams per kilogram. In Chapter 4, which was the digestion and absorption chapter, we covered protein digestion and absorption. And we know that in the liver that amino acids are used for protein synthesis, so creating new proteins, for energy needs to fuel our body, or it can be converted to carbohydrate, fat, or released into the bloodstream. However, in early infancy, the GI tract is permeable to small proteins, and that can predispose an infant to food allergies later on in life. This is why you see pediatricians recommending that you wait until an infant is between the ages of 4 and 6 months to introduce common allergenic foods. In this picture, you see how protein digestion and absorption occurs. So first we have protein, which is broken down into polypeptides in the stomach. So this is occurring in the stomach. In the lumen of the small intestine here, we have these same polypeptides, which get broken down into tripeptides, which are links of 3 amino acids, into dipeptides, which are 2 amino acids, and into individual amino acids. So these are 1. Then they are absorbed in here. And these dipeptides and tripeptides, they're broken down further. And so every time they're broken down, you're going to get smaller and smaller particles until you're left with amino acids. And these dipeptides are broken down into amino acids. And once they are absorbed, they're going into your bloodstream, into your liver, and then throughout your body. Proteins function in many crucial ways in metabolism and in the formation of essential compounds and structures. Proteins produce vital body structures such as collagen, actin, and myosin. These structural proteins make up more than 1/3 of body protein and provide a matrix for muscle, connective tissue, and bone. During periods of growth, new proteins are synthesized to support development of body tissues and structures. During malnutrition or disease, proteins are broken down for energy. If protein consumption is inadequate, the concentration of blood proteins decreases, which causes excessive fluid buildup in the surrounding tissues, and those tissues will swell with excess fluid, and this is called edema. So if we look at this picture, you can see the edema forming in this individual's foot. So here you have a normal tissue right here, and here you have swollen tissue. Antibody proteins are a key component of immune function. Antibodies bind foreign antigens and help prevent disease. Without sufficient dietary proteins, antibodies cannot be formed and an immune incompetence called anergy develops. This reduces the body's ability to fight an infection. Anergy can make measles a fatal disease for malnourished children. Protein also transports nutrients throughout the bloodstream. You see this in the protein hemoglobin, which carries oxygen from the lungs to cells. Another example is transferrin and ferritin, which carries and stores iron. The body must maintain a constant concentration of blood glucose to supply energy, especially for red blood cells and brain cells. If carbohydrate intake is inadequate to maintain these blood glucose levels, the liver is forced to make glucose from the amino acids in the body. This is called gluconeogenesis. Protein also provides energy at 4 calories per gram, but they supply very little energy for healthy individuals. Under normal conditions, the body cells use fat and carbohydrates as energy. We do have health concerns related to protein intake. Developing countries have people suffering from malnutrition and disease, and their protein intake is inadequate. They are not consuming enough protein. However, in developed countries, people eat a lot more protein, and we know that too little or too much protein can have serious health consequences. Protein energy malnutrition is when protein deficiency usually occurs in combination with a deficiency of energy, and this can cause devastating effects in children, such as fail to grow normally. So a child who maybe was supposed to grow up to be 6 foot tall, maybe they're only 5'8". They can develop diarrhea, infections, diseases, and even early death. So there are 2 different types of protein energy malnutrition. The first one is marasmus, which is severe energy and protein deficient. The characteristics here are severe weight loss, wasting of muscle and body fat. So this is an individual, like a child in this picture, that you can see their skin, you can see their bones. Severe growth impairment, less than 60% of normal weight for age. So these children and adults will be very, very skinny, very tiny. And this happens over time. So the second one is kwashiorkor, which is severe protein deficiency with moderate energy deficient. This is often accompanied by infections or other diseases. So some characteristics are edema, mild to moderate weight loss, maintenance of some muscle and subcutaneous fat, rapid onset and fatty liver. So if we look at this child right here, you can see that he isn't really malnourished. He doesn't look like this child where you can see the skin and bones, but instead he has a distended abdomen, he has that edema, and you see that because it's a protein deficiency. He may be eating enough calories in general, but not enough protein. And typically you see this in South Africa and developing countries where they're consuming a lot of grains. And so that's not giving them enough protein, especially essential amino acids. And so you see this distended abdomen and swelling and edema. So we also have high protein diets, and these diets overburden the kidney's capacity to excrete excess urea, and this can lead to dehydration. So someone who's consuming a high protein diet really needs to drink a lot of water. This can increase urinary calcium loss, and over time this can lead to osteoporosis, which causes brittle bones and fractures easily later on in life. And excess protein intake is primarily from a high intake of animal proteins. So this means that plant-based food intake is low. And whenever someone's not consuming enough plant-based food, they have a low intake of fiber, vitamins, minerals, and phytochemicals, all things that are very healthy for you and good for you. And it also means that there's a higher consumption of saturated fat and cholesterol. And we talked about that in the lipids chapter about the long-term effects of consuming too much saturated fat and cholesterol. So we do have food protein allergies, which are when proteins in food causes hypersensitivity reactions, and this triggers an immune response. This stimulates white blood cells to produce antibodies, and then the symptoms of an allergic reaction. So some symptoms could be a runny nose, sneezing, itchy skin, hives, digestive upset, or anaphylaxis. So anaphylaxis is a life-threatening condition, and this causes decreased blood pressure and respiratory distress. So someone who's having this could die without medical treatment. Typically people who have anaphylaxis to certain food items carry an EpiPen. And there's 9 foods that account for about 90% of all food allergies. So these include peanuts, tree nuts, milk, eggs, fish, shellfish, soy, and wheat. And you'll see all of these high protein allergy foods listed on an ingredient label on food products. So to prevent food allergy reactions, if you know you have a food allergy, avoid those trigger foods. Also, reading labels. This is really crucial for individuals that have a food allergy. Knowing that that food contains whatever you're allergic to can help prevent an allergic reaction. Ask questions when eating out. So if you plan on ordering something and you're worried that it has something you're allergic to, ask questions to make sure it's not in that product. And also preventing cross contact. So washing thoroughly before preparing an allergen-free meal, making sure that nothing's cross-contaminating with each other. We can prevent food allergies by feeding babies only breast milk or formula until 6 months old, delaying introduction of cow's milk until 1 year old, serving egg whites to children after 2 years, and keep diets free of peanuts, tree nuts, fish, and shellfish until 3 years old. However, many children with food allergies outgrow them. So just because a child is allergic to one of the 9 top food allergies, it does not mean that they will be allergic to it as an adult. Sometimes they do outgrow that. We have vegetarian diets, which are diets that is rich in fruits, vegetables, legumes, and grains. And these individuals have increased intakes of antioxidant nutrients, dietary fiber, phytochemicals, which we know help prevent cancer in the long run. And they also have a decreased intake of saturated fat and cholesterol, because we know that saturated fat and cholesterol is found in meat products. And there is research to say that vegetarianism may protect against obesity. So there is different types of vegetarian diets. Their eating patterns are different. Vegans eat only plant foods. So these diets may be low in high biological value protein, because we know we find that in animal protein only. Riboflavin, which is found in milk, vitamin D, vitamin B12, calcium, iron, and zinc. Lacto-vegetarians include dairy, so they will consume milk products. Lacto-ovo-vegetarians will include eggs and dairy products. For someone that's consuming a vegetarian diet, they can avoid deficiencies by using complementary proteins. So that's beans and rice, combining those food items that are deficient in one essential amino acid and combining it with another product that has it. They can obtain riboflavin from green leafy veggies, whole grain bread, cereal, yeast, and legumes. Vitamin D can be obtained from fortified foods such as soy milk, dietary supplements, or sun exposure. Calcium can be obtained from calcium fortified foods such as orange juice, soy milk, and tofu, and green leafy vegetables, although the calcium in green leafy vegetables may not be well absorbed. And they can also consume dietary supplements. Vitamin B12 can be obtained from fortified foods and supplements, and iron can be obtained from whole grains, cereals, dried fruits, nuts, and legumes. Vitamin C-rich foods need to be consumed to enhance iron absorption in any of these foods.